about women's suffrage without just a brief mention of Susan B. Anthony, probably the most widely known woman suffragist. She also was a supporter of abolition, temperance, labor rights, and equal pay for equal work. You see her life dates there, so she did not live to see women guaranteed the right to vote. So how were women able to gain the right to vote in our country? There were two ways, and neither of them were easy. The first is approval by state legislatures on a state-by-state basis. You could go to your state legislature and try and get that passed so that women in your state could vote. This states' rights issue, and you see I have it in quotation marks, would prove pretty daunting, especially in the South. Conservative white male-controlled legislatures. If women couldn't vote, the odds of a woman being in a legislature were pretty slim. So you had to convince your legislators. Your other option would be to pass an amendment to the United States Constitution. Yeah, good luck on that too. It's a very difficult task to pass 2/3 majorities of both houses and then 3/4 of the states. I would probably put forth you will never see another amendment to a constitution in our lifetimes at least. So talk briefly about a woman by the name of Ella Chamberlain. And Chamberlain attended a suffrage convention held in Des Moines, Iowa in 1892, and Chamberlain was out of the Tampa area. And you might wonder, well, what the heck is she doing in Iowa? Well, she came from Iowa. That was where she was born. But she returned to Florida. She was fired up. She wanted to gain suffrage rights for women. So in 1893, she was elected as president of the Florida Woman Suffrage Association. This group had some national ties and backing, and that backing is, of course, important because, as Greg will tell you, and I remember, and anybody who's associated with small organizations, funding is always a problem. And you know, they were doing bake sales and you know, whatever they could do to raise money. After a couple of years, the group's membership was approximately 100 people in 2 years. But so 1895, she's speaking in a Woman's Journal article, and she talks about a second reason for women's suffrage, not just equality for women, but the growth and influence of the African American male. And I just want to read you Chamberlain's own words on this. So you might think, oh, she's kind of progressive, she's pushing for women's suffrage. This will change your mind pretty quickly. I contend that Southern women, more than those of any other section of our country, need the authority of the ballot. Intelligent, educated, and deeply religious, the Southern woman finds herself dominated by the lowest class of voters. Laying aside the humiliation of being governed by the ex-slave who is just emerging from centuries of barbarism and servitude, consider his unfitness as a voter. Ignorant, thriftless, and too often vicious and depraved, it doesn't get any better, folks. His vote, as easily purchased as his lightest possession, his is the natural prey of conscienceless politicians and stands before the Southern woman as a constant menace to her already restricted liberties. And this large body of degraded and undesirable Southern voters is being augmented by large numbers of foreigners, immediately adapted into the body politic by the easy law which manufactures American citizens out of rejected foreign material on the simple declaration of intent. I'm a freeborn woman, American woman. My ancestors left their bloody footprints in the snows of Valley Forge and were among the brave Kentucky riflemen, the immortal few who gave their lives at the Battle of New Orleans for liberty for themselves and their children. I deny that my brother American can properly represent me. How then can I, with the blood of heroes in my heart and the free and independent spirit that bequeathed me, quietly submit to representation by the alien and the Negro? Yeah. I'm not sure any comment is really even needed on that. But there's Miss Chamberlain. She's got a bust at Tampa Riverwalk on their historic monument trail. I have not seen that. I stole this from Wikimedia Commons. So then there's this organization called the Florida Equal Suffrage Association, founded in 1913. Mary Stafford is president. They held events in cities such as Pensacola, Miami, Tampa, and Daytona Beach. North, south, east, and west. Try to cover the whole state. The political leanings of suffragists, well, we've just seen Ella Chamberlain. We know what she thinks. So, while you might see women's suffrage as being progressive, that's really not what was in women's minds. It's a response to the African American male voter, white men who supported women's suffrage often supported this only as a way to counteract the African American male. The Pensacola Equal Suffrage League discusses the concept of anti-militancy. And just real quick, the traditions of the South were part of the culture of these women. They were interested in enfranchisement, but were afraid, not of themselves, not of the public, not of ridicule. They were afraid of aligning themselves with a movement at odds with their ethics. They were conservative women who held the standards of womanhood high. They believed a woman's first duty was to her child, and that above all things, a woman should love the home and be a homemaker. They opposed the force of violence and would not be a part of a militant movement. And again, these organizations, they would often bring in out-of-state speakers. You have to remember, Florida was still somewhat of a, certainly not what it is today as far as population. Many of them were promoting Woodrow Wilson based upon his support of women's suffrage. I'm not sure Wilson could hardly be called a progressive. So, but we talk about anti-militancy, but then you get to Mary Nolan here, and at 73, she and 40 others were arrested outside the White House, basically just trying to bring the issue of suffrage to the attention of Wilson. Nolan was sentenced to 6 days in jail. She got a light sentence, actually. A lot of those 40, they were sentenced to, I believe, like 30 days in jail, which these were women who were not causing a big problem. The one thing I read, it sounded like they were just, marching up and down the street, basically. But so women decide they're going to take the fight to Tallahassee. Certainly not an easy measure, as we talked about. and Palm Beach Representative H.L. Bussey in 1913. He introduced equal suffrage legislation, but he had no intention of voting for it. And the bill falls amidst racist and sexist commentary from these white male legislators. An example is Hernando County Representative L.C. O'Neill, and he talked about what he considered traditional values, stating that women's suffrage was contrary to tradition, history, manners, modesty, and the best thought of the country. If women were granted the ballot, they would be lowered from the exalted position which they now hold. I don't know. John Gornto from Lafayette County claimed that if women were given the right to vote, it would bring on marital unhappiness, divorces, and a disruptive domestic condition. Look, I can't make this stuff up, people. I'm not a good writer. And worse, if you gave African American women the right to vote, it would entail such a train of evils that it would be impossible to conceive of what might follow. Yeah, so obviously nothing passed in 1913. So we move on to the next legislature in 1915. These attempts again passed, but however, the city of Fellsmere was incorporated, and incorporation documents included equal suffrage. Kind of interesting that it got through that way. And you can't really read the marker. I did not make it to Fellsmere. Again, I lifted this photo from elsewhere. But the population of Fellsmere is of a high type of intelligence with lofty ideals and wise execution. Progressive in all things, perhaps no better indication of the fact may be given than the unanimous vote of the town granting unrestricted suffrage to women. And that was in the local newspaper also. So, so women are starting to make some inroads here. Fellsmere can certainly not be considered Tallahassee, Orlando, Tampa, Miami.
Where in Huntsville?
Yeah. So we come back to 1917. The equal suffrage legislation is again submitted. It passed the Senate this time, the Florida Senate, that is. Volusia County Representative and future Governor David Schultz recommended passage, and I don't have it here, but Schultz proved just how enlightened he is, that it wouldn't knock women off their pedestal that we put them on. You know, it'll be okay. And Schultz is actually buried in Daytona Beach. He's got a great big, huge marker in Daytona Memorial Park. In the old section, you know, it's on both sides of the road, where the office is on one side, it's on the other. If you take the little winding trail up, you can't help but run into it. It's right at the top. But unfortunately, in 1917, even with Schultz's pushing, they just couldn't garner that 3/5 majority that was needed. So special session was called in 1918, and yet again the bill fails, but Volusia County cities of Orange City, Daytona Beach, and DeLand all passed bills allowing women's suffrage. Well, now we're going to try Washington, D.C. Tallahassee doesn't work. Let's move further north. During the 1919 term, the United States Congress took up discussion. The House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed the amendment. It took the Senate a little while longer, and 66 to 30, so you can tell that's just barely eking through. Florida Representatives Herbert Drain and William Sears voted to approve the legislation. John Smithwich and Frank Clark voted against it. The first thing that strikes me on that is there's only 4 representatives from the state of Florida in Washington, but you know, a whole different time. So Florida Senators Duncan Fletcher and Park Trammell voted against it. Fletcher believed the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed African American men the right to vote, was a mistake, and this would only compound that error. This is Herbert Drain. But some words from Park Trammell, who voted against the 19th Amendment. In our state at present, our elections are participated in almost exclusivity by our white men, and the Negro is not a factor in the selection of our public officials. I'm opposed to any proposition which would possibly invite greater and more extensive participation in our election on the part of the Negro population. I'm also opposed to any policy that may invite and probably stimulate citizens of other states who do not understand and appreciate our race problem, his term, in making an effort to bring the Negroes of Florida into politics. Leave it to politicians to turn something about women into a race issue. So we're going to go back to Tallahassee. We're gonna try there again. Right now, if you remember, the 19th Amendment has passed through the United States Congress. It's now on to the states, and you can take a leadership position on this, or you can be left behind. And as we already know, Florida was left behind. Governor at the time, Sidney Johnston Cates, urged the state legislature to pass this legislation, which they did not, and Tennessee jumped on that opportunity barely. Tennessee was not progressive. Let's not think that. That passed by only, it was either 1 or 2 votes. It was a very contentious time. But on September 7th, 1920, Florida women were able to register to vote across the state. And I love this piece.
Yeah.
I just happened to stumble on that. I was actually looking for Jackie Robinson pictures that I could use, and stumbled on this one as well. And this is a piece that a woman, families would have hung in like a front window or something like that to advertise. So what were the outcomes? Women now have the right to register to vote. They can go to the polls, vote for their preferred candidate. So what were some of those outcomes? 19th Amendment guaranteed approximately 227,000 women the right to vote. In 1916, in the gubernatorial election, approximately 81,000 ballots were cast. Fast forward to 1920, 133,000. Not bad, not too bad, but if you look, that's about 50,000. That's about 25%, a little bit less of that. So when you look at it in those terms, it's not great. There's probably several reasons for that. One, the timing to sign up for voting was really getting near election time at that point, so there wasn't a huge amount of time. Women may just not have done it, may not have understood it. Their husbands may not have allowed it.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something, a reality women had to face. Even if they did dare go sign up, it's possible their husband did not allow them to go to the polls. In the 1920 presidential election, approximately 68% of eligible males cast their vote, and approximately 33% of eligible women did. That's across the country, that's not a Florida number. So, so we see that, you know, women were finally able to vote. This woman here, Maxine Baker, and then she's not well known for this. If you've heard of the Baker Act in Florida, that's her. But as part of the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the League of Women Voters requested the state to take this up again and actually formally act upon it. Both houses did, and as the Daytona Beach News Journal so proudly trumpeted, Florida gals may vote at last. So Miss Baker stated, "I feel the enlightened legislature of 1969 would like to rectify an oversight of 50 years ago." I can imagine the sarcasm coming out of her mouth at that, the word enlightened. She, I know nothing else about her, but boy, she looks like she was probably tough. So now all of you women, you gals have the right to vote. You may vote at last. So what was Tallahassee like in 1956? It was the state capital. It was home to Florida State and Florida A&M. Tallahassee Community College, or is it Tallahassee State College, I think it is now, was not in existence at the time. I had to look that up. I did not know that. The 1950 census population for Tallahassee, 27,000. The state capital of Florida is smaller than what New Smyrna Beach is now. New Smyrna Beach, somewhere give or take 35,000. You know, I think the last number I saw was an estimate of about 33, and it was about 2 years old. So about 9,400 residents were African American, 35%. Probably a pretty high percentage compared to many communities. So let's take a quick look at race relations in Tallahassee around that time. Florida State University and Florida A&M students were not allowed to fraternize, and fraternize is the word that is used in the local ordinance on that. Basically, they couldn't attend social gatherings together. Florida State students were not allowed on the FAMU campus without a chaperone, a white chaperone. But yet, Florida A&M was considered very important economically. Remember, we're talking a community of less than 30,000 people. Local merchants, some of them would rely on Florida A&M faculty, Florida A&M staff, students and their families. Again, these were probably better off, more well-off students at the time. Many of the faculty and staff at Florida A&M would have made more money than many white residents in Tallahassee at the time. But yet, the high schools are segregated, of course. Tallahassee paid for segregated swimming pools, and they even built a segregated golf course. Anybody that plays golf knows how expensive the upkeep on a golf course is. They actually built a separate golf course for African Americans. Segregation was that ingrained. They did have 2 black police officers, but they could only patrol black neighborhoods. They weren't allowed in the white neighborhoods, so. Black residents were able to freely vote, however, and voter registration didn't appear to be a problem. And there was little Klan activity, but there were known leaders living in the area. And the one author I referenced earlier, who kind of coined that phrase, they put forth the thought, and it's just a thought, that blacks were freely able to vote and there was relatively little Klan activity for several reasons. One, you're in the state capitol. You don't really want to draw the attention of, even if it's conservative white politicians at the time, you just don't want to draw that bad attention to yourself. There was also a belief amongst white leaders, as we've seen, that African Americans kind of knew their place. They knew what their role in society was. Even those maybe with a PhD who are teaching at Florida A&M. And remember, they were happy. There's no race problems, so the Klan didn't have anything to do. So now we get to May 26, 1956. Kind of just a normal day, nothing spectacular here. Cities Transit buses. Cities Transit is the name of the bus company, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a couple minutes. Tallahassee ordinance provided for segregation on buses. Literally a line drawn about 2/3 of the way back in the bus. If you are African American, you better haul yourself behind that line. Didn't matter if there were open seats and every seat in the African American section was full, you better stand. So we get to May 26th, and 2 Florida A&M students, Wilhelmina Jakes and Carrie Patterson, boarded a city's transit bus. They paid their dime fare. A dime to ride the bus, geez. There were no seats in the rear of the bus. Well, they sat down next to a white woman directly behind the bus driver. And you can imagine the scene. So we're gonna let Miss Jakes tell you what happened. I thought it just easiest. When we sat down, the driver said, "You girls can't sit there." I said, "Why?" He said, "You just can't sit there." I got up, went to him, and said, "Give me my dime back and I'll get off." He said, "I can't give you your dime." I returned to my seat and I sat down. He drove the bus to the nearest service station, went into the station and made a call. He returned to the bus and said, "Everyone remain seated." Within 5 minutes, three cars loaded with policemen arrived. 2 of the officers came on the bus. They talked to the driver and then came over to Carrie and I. One of the officers said, "Are you girls having a problem?" I explained to him what happened and told him I would get off the bus if the driver would give me my dime. He said, "You girls want a ride? I'll give you a ride. Come with me." So Carrie and I followed the officer to his car, got in. He took us to the police station. When we got there, it appeared as if the entire police force was there to greet us. It was somewhat frightening, and he charged us with inciting a riot. A riot. So bail was set at $25 each, and Florida A&M administrators eventually arranged for that bail that day, and the young ladies were released to A&M administrators. The Tallahassee Democrat was the local paper, and certainly was not one of that liberal press you might hear about occasionally. They announced these arrests, and they printed the girl's address. Now you know what's going to happen. You know nothing good is going to come of that. Next day a cross was burning in their yard. So the story was starting to take on a life of its own, as might be expected, way beyond what city's transit could have controlled. And the city of Tallahassee did nothing to really control this story. The local NAACP became involved, they heard about it, and this went all the way up at the national level, all the way to the desk of Roy Wilkins. And what's a little bit fascinating is neither Jakes or Patterson appear to have been involved with the NAACP. They didn't have any association with any civil rights group or anything of the sort. You know, they appear to have both been just young girls attending college. They were pretty apolitical, it seems. Within just a couple of days, A&M students they were really up in arms about this. And this wasn't just about the treatment of Jakes and Patterson. This is just the overall treatment in Tallahassee. But city's transit really is who came in for their anger. And the A&M student body president, Brodus Hartley, he led a meeting, and hundreds of students attended to denounce the treatment of African Americans on these bus lines. So now we have a movement going. The students called for a bus boycott through the remainder of the semester. Now, you know, we're at May. We're really about at the end of the semester here. But does anybody see these outside agitators that we talked about earlier? I never did. So the students, they took their requests to non-student body, and they received some considerable support. And it was around this time that Charles Kinsey Steele is quoted, "Old Tallahassee is not what she used to be." So what was the white response to this boycott effort? They played a really bad hand. If they were playing poker, they probably had a couple of threes and thought they were going to win. And that's elected officials, residents, newspaper editors, the bus, city's transit people. They weren't able to see the bigger picture going on. You know, we have additional Supreme Court rulings coming down, declaring segregated seating as unconstitutional. The Tallahassee Democrats got to pipe in again where it's not needed, and just can't let things go and claim that Jakes and Patterson were influenced by this decision, which they weren't. And so while white leaders were downplaying what might happen here, African American leaders, especially in the church, they took a different route. So we've got a photo of Charles Kinsey Steele here in front of his Bethel Missionary Baptist Church. And again, we're talking just days after this event. He had a public meeting at his church. Residents, not just students, voiced their frustrations over how they were treated on this bus line. And so they tried to have an open dialogue with city leaders and bus officials, which went nowhere, as might be expected of the time. So Steele holds another meeting. Well, this time he gets bombarded with about 500 people attending this meeting. And here it was voted on that this boycott was going to be throughout the entire community, not just on routes that ran on A&M campus. Ultimately, out of all of this, an organization called the Inter-Civil Council was created, and this was suggested by Florida A&M professor to plan and execute civil, religious, scientific, educational, and recreational programs for the benefit, enjoyment, general improvement, and welfare of its members, whatever that means. But again, what we have here is we have a locally led, a locally developed effort. We don't have these outside agitators. And Reverend Steele was, of course, elected as the ICC president. So the impact of this boycott as we start going through the summer, estimates put black ridership at about 60 to 70% of city's transit riders. You remember back, about 35% of the population was African American. About 90% of those African American riders supported this boycott. And it was estimated already by June that revenues on bus lines were down about 60%. So here again we have the city of Tallahassee who could say, okay, we've got a problem, we might want to try to address this in some manner. No. We doubled down on this. We let cities transit increase bus fares to try and increase revenues, and we lowered the franchise fee from 3% to 1/2 of 1%. That's not even worth the trouble, but you know, that's what they did. That was their response. We're going to try to help cities transit out and help them recoup their profits. So we have all these African American riders who formerly took the bus to get to work and maybe to school. So how did they get there? If they're not taking the bus, you know, they can walk, but they may live a considerable distance from their employment. So the ICC formed a transport committee, and they recruited 65 drivers to operate what they called a carpool system. And this carpool system was basically, hey, I need a ride to work, and you come and you pick me up and you take me to work. Now, I don't pay you for that. If I feel inclined, I give money to the ICC to help cover expenses on that. The problem is, city leaders, of course, didn't take long to pick up on this. They knew what was going on, and they cracked down hard on this carpool system, partly because there were some very strict laws within the city about this. You know, you were messing with city money at that point, so they would pull people over for the most minor of violations or perceived violations. Tickets were written on a very regular basis. There were even times where drivers would just be taken into police headquarters and questioned. Reverend Steele himself was arrested 3 times. I think that's probably to be expected when you're the point person, when you're seen as the leader. In October, they're still trying to crack down on this. Fines from judges of more than $20,000 were issued to drivers. That's a considerable amount of money today, let alone in 1956. In effect, this did break the carpool system, but it didn't, however, break the riders. They continued this boycott. So as the year starts to come to a close, the boycott kind of winds down. They're starting to make a little bit of success. The Supreme Court decisions continue to go in their direction. The problem being nobody really knew, do these decisions such as Browder versus Gale, do they apply everywhere, or is it just in that case? By December, the ICC voted to end the boycott. And while they ended the boycott, it wasn't when you get back on the bus, go to the back of the bus like it used to be. It was sit closer to the front of the bus. You know, we're going to push on this a little bit. And, you know, as you can see, we've got Reverend Steele right there. We've got another African-American male. This is certainly not at the rear of the bus. So how does Tallahassee deal with this? Well, we somewhat stopped going after the riders. Now we're going to go after cities transit. We're gonna make another enemy here. So, bus company was told, you're going to enforce our segregation laws, or you're gonna forfeit your franchise agreement with us. And here we have Police Chief Frank Stoudemire in his lovely wood-paneled office, probably very fashionable at the time. They now start arresting bus drivers. So, January 7th, the commissioners repealed segregated seating. Instead, they instituted something called assigned seating. Now, every one of us knows what that's going to mean. We don't have to think about this very hard, but I'm the bus driver. I decide where you sit. I tell you you're sitting in row 1, you know, by the window or whatever. Well, you know what that means. The African American riders, you're sitting in the very back of the bus again. Things haven't changed. Non-ordinance segregation. It appears that this kind of just faded out naturally. I never really found anything showing how that went away. But it continued to put cities transit and bus drivers in a bad situation. But what were some of the outcomes from this? African American bus riders gained the right to sit in any unoccupied seat. One of the demands from the ICC had been that cities transit hire more black bus drivers. And they eventually did this. It did take time. Prior to that, black bus drivers had only driven predominantly black routes, Florida A&M campus mostly. While harassment on the buses was lessened, it was not eliminated, but there were concerted efforts to treat African American riders better and with a little more courtesy. Racism certainly did not go away just because the bus boycott was ending. But it proved that a local grassroots initiative was able to effect lasting change. And while I didn't really bring up the NAACP and national organizations very much, we can't say they were not involved. They certainly were. You know, there's certainly some financial help. There's certainly some political help on that. But generally this was a locally led effort without the outside agitators that, that we had talked about. So, and today, of all things, the main bus plaza in Tallahassee is the C.K. Steele Bus Plaza. Certainly in recognition for his efforts. there you have a very brief introduction to the Tallahassee bus boycott. Well, with that, thank you very much